My stepfather left me his entire inheritance, not to his children. A year has passed and those words still seem unreal. They seem like a mistake that ruined my life. I keep waiting for someone to call and say it was all a big misunderstanding, that the real will has been found, but no one calls, except the lawyers and them. My name is Anna. I'm 36. For most of my life, my primary goal was to be invisible. It was easier that way. My mom married Robert when I was 10. I moved into his house. He was a quiet man, stern, not cruel, just distant. He had 2 children of his own, Mark and Sarah. They were a few years older than me. They were his real family. I was the add-on, the footnote. My mom always told me to be patient, to give them time. But time just seemed to make the lines clearer. There was them and then there was me. I learned early on not to expect much, not to ask for much. My job was to not cause any trouble, so I didn't. I was a quiet kid. I got good grades. I didn't have loud friends over. I tried to make myself smaller so they wouldn't notice me. But they always noticed. I was the reminder that their family wasn't the same anymore. Robert. He was a difficult person to read. He never raised his voice at me. He never treated me badly. But he never treated me like a daughter either. He was just the man of the house, the authority, the one who paid the bills and expected things to be in order. Affection wasn't his language. He never hugged me. I can't remember him ever really smiling at me. His approval was a short nod. That was it. That was the most you could hope for. And for a long time, I tried to get that nod. Mark and Sarah never had to try. They were born with his approval. It was their birthright. They were confident, loud. They took up all the space in every room they entered. They had his last name. They had his history. I remember one Christmas, I was maybe 14. The whole family was there, aunts, uncles, cousins, all his side. They were passing around old photo albums, telling stories from before my mom and I were there. I just sat on the floor trying to look interested, but I wasn't in any of the pictures. I wasn't in any of the stories. When I walked into a room where they were talking, the conversation would sometimes just stop. It was like a silent agreement. There were Walker family matters, and then there was everything else. I was everything else. They never said it out loud. They didn't have to. I remember my high school graduation. My mom was so proud. She took 1,000 pictures. Robert came. He stood in the back. He gave me a nod. Mark and Sarah didn't come. They had something else to do. It was always something else. Robert bought me a car when I turned 17. It was a practical, used car. He handed me the keys and a folder with the insurance papers. He told me to be responsible with it. I was so grateful. I thought it was a sign. Maybe he was finally starting to see me. Then I heard Sarah talking to her brother a few days later. She was upset that her new car fund would be smaller because of what he spent on me. That's what it was. Not a gift. A transaction. An expense. That's when I stopped trying so hard. I realized it didn't matter what I did. My role was fixed. I was the stepdaughter, the temporary resident. I focused on my own life. I went to college. I got a job. I moved out as soon as I could. I stayed polite. I came for holidays. I brought a bottle of wine and a gift. I would sit at the dinner table and listen to them talk about things that had nothing to do with me. Their jobs, their investments, their future plans for Robert's business. They talked about the inheritance openly, in front of him, in front of me. It was always about what they would do with the house, with the company, with the money. It was a given. It was their destiny. Robert would just sit there at the head of the table listening. He never said a word. I just assumed he agreed. Why wouldn't he? They were his children. I never expected anything, I swear. The thought never even crossed my mind. To me, Robert's money was like his last name. It belonged to them. It had nothing to do with me. All I wanted was peace. I didn't want conflict. So I just stayed quiet. I kept my head down. And then he got sick. It was sudden. It was fast. He was still the same man even then. Private, stoic. He didn't want anyone's pity. He handled it all himself. The doctors, the treatments. He didn't involve anyone more than he had to. Mark and Sarah were there, but it felt performative. They'd visit for an hour, look at their phones, and talk about how inconvenient it all was. They seemed more annoyed than worried. I visited when I could. I didn't know what to do. I'd just sit with him. Sometimes we wouldn't even talk. I'd bring him a book or a newspaper. I'd make sure he had water. One day, he asked me to help him with some paperwork, just organizing some files. It was all business stuff. Old receipts, tax forms, nothing personal. He just pointed to a box and told me what needed to be done. He watched me for a bit, then he closed his eyes. I spent a few hours just sorting papers. It felt useful. It felt normal. I didn't think anything of it. He passed away a few weeks later. The funeral was exactly what you'd expect. Mark and Sarah were the grieving children. They stood at the front, accepting condolences. They looked the part. I stood in the back with my mom. I was the stepdaughter again. A few people gave me a sad look, but no one really knew what to say to me. I didn't know what to say either. I was sad, but it was a quiet, complicated sadness. I was mourning a man I never really knew. And then, a week later, we were at the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. It was a small room. There was me, my mom, Mark, and Sarah. Mark and Sarah were already talking about selling the house. They were discussing realtors. My mom looked uncomfortable. I just wanted to disappear. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, came in. He'd been Robert's lawyer for decades. He looked tired. He sat down and opened a folder. He started speaking in that formal legal way. I didn't really understand most of it. Mark and Sarah were leaning forward. They looked impatient, like they were waiting for the punchline of a long story. And then Mr. Harris got to the main part, the part about the estate. He took a deep breath. He looked at me. It was a strange look, almost like an apology. Then he read it. He said that Robert's entire estate, the house, the business, the investments, everything, was to be left to me, Anna Walker. The room was completely silent. I thought I misheard him. It had to be a mistake. I looked at my mom. Her face was white. She looked as shocked as I felt. I looked at Mark and Sarah. Their faces had changed. The confidence was gone. It was replaced with total disbelief. Then it turned to anger. Mark was the first to speak. He accused the lawyer of making a mistake. He demanded to see the document. Sarah just stared at me. It wasn't a sad stare. It was pure hatred. I couldn't breathe. I felt like the whole room was tilting. Mr. Harris was calm. He confirmed that there was no mistake. The will was clear, signed, and witnessed. He said Robert had updated it 6 months before he died. 6 months. Right after he got his diagnosis. Mark started yelling then, not at the lawyer, at me. He accused me of manipulating his father, of taking advantage of a sick man. Sarah joined in. Her voice was sharp. She said I had been plotting this for years, that I was a thief. I couldn't say anything. My voice was gone. I just sat there, frozen. I felt like a criminal on trial. My mom tried to intervene to calm them down, but they wouldn't listen. They were convinced I had done something terrible. Mr. Harris finally had to ask them to leave. He said the meeting was over. Mark pointed a finger at me on his way out. He made it clear this wasn't over. Sarah gave me one last look of disgust and then followed him. And then it was just me, my mom, and the lawyer in that silent room. My mom was crying. She kept asking me if I knew, if I had any idea. I told her no. I swore to her that I was as shocked as she was. I think she believed me. But there was a new distance between us two, a question that was now always going to be there. Mr. Harris looked at me with pity. He handed me a business card. He told me to call him when I was ready to discuss the next steps. He called it administering the estate. It sounded so sterile, so disconnected from the chaos that had just exploded. I walked out of that office and felt like I was in a different world. Nothing made sense. Why would Robert do this? He barely spoke to me. He barely acknowledged me. It felt like a punishment. But for who? For them or for me? The phone started ringing that same day. First it was Mark. He left a long, angry voicemail. It was full of threats. He was going to contest the will. He was going to hire the best lawyers. He was going to expose me for what I was. Then it was Sarah. She didn't yell. She was worse. Her message was cold. She detailed all the ways she was going to make my life a living hell. She said I would never see a penny of that money. Then the calls from extended family started. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were confused. They wanted to know my side of the story. Others were already on Mark and Sarah's side. They accused me of being greedy and manipulative. I stopped answering the phone. I felt like I was under siege. I didn't leave my apartment for 3 days. I just kept replaying that moment in the lawyer's office. The looks on their faces, the things they said, and the one big unanswered question, why? I had no answers. I felt guilty, even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. I felt like I had stolen something that was never meant to be mine. My mom tried to help. She came over. She brought food I didn't eat. She was torn. She loved me, but she had been married to Robert for over 20 years. She knew Mark and Sarah as family. She couldn't understand Robert's decision either. She kept saying it was so out of character. It made me feel even more alone. If my own mother couldn't fully be on my side, who could? I started to doubt my own memory. Had I missed something? Did Robert say something to me? I went over every single interaction I ever had with him. The knot at my graduation, the keys to the used car, the time I organized his files when he was sick. It was nothing. A handful of quiet, awkward moments over 2 decades. It didn't add up. A week after the will reading, I got a formal letter in the mail. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Mark and Sarah had officially filed a lawsuit to contest the will. The letter listed their claims: undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, fraud. They were accusing me of tricking a dying man into changing his will. Reading those words on paper made it feel terrifyingly real. I was just a person with a normal job and a small apartment. They had access to Robert's world, to money and powerful people. I felt completely out of my depth. I finally called Mr. Harris back. I had to. I told him about the lawsuit. He didn't sound surprised. He told me not to worry. He said Robert had anticipated this. Anticipated this? What did that mean? Mr. Harris asked me to come to his office. He said there was something else Robert had left for me. Not money, information. I was scared. I didn't know what to expect. Was it a letter explaining everything? An apology? I went to his office the next day. This time, it was just me and him. He didn't make small talk. He pulled out a thick, heavy box from a cabinet. Not a cardboard box. It was a secure document box. He put it on the table between us. He explained that Robert had left it in his care, with very specific instructions. The box was only to be given to me, and only after his death. Mr. Harris said he didn't know what was inside. Robert had sealed it himself. He handed me a key. My hand was shaking when I took it. I unlocked the box and lifted the lid. It wasn't a letter. It was full of binders. Dozens of them, neatly labeled. Each label had a year on it, starting from the year my mom married him. I pulled one out. It was for the first year we lived there. I was 10. I opened it. Inside were pages of documents. But not just documents. There were notes. Handwritten notes in Robert's neat, precise script. He had been keeping a log, a journal, for over 20 years. He documented everything. I saw a date and a note next to it. It was about a school play I was in. He wrote that he had attended. He noted that Mark and Sarah had been invited, but chose to go to a party instead. Another entry. My 11th birthday. My mom had thrown me a small party. Robert noted who came. He also noted that Mark and Sarah had complained about the noise. Another entry, a few years later. It detailed the cost of a ski trip he had paid for Mark and Sarah. Next to it was a note about a school trip I had wanted to go on. A trip I never told him about because I knew it was too expensive. Somehow he knew. He had written down the cost of the trip and the date it was due. I kept turning the pages. It was all there. Every holiday, every family dinner, every argument I never knew he had witnessed. He wrote down when Mark borrowed money and didn't pay it back. He had dates and amounts. He wrote down when Sarah crashed her car and tried to blame it on someone else. He had a copy of the repair bill. He documented the times they didn't call on his birthday, the times they missed family events for trivial reasons. It was a cold, factual record of their behavior. There was no emotion in his writing, just facts. He documented their entitlement, their lack of gratitude, their casual disregard for anyone but themselves. And then there were the entries about me. They were just as factual. He noted when I graduated from college with honors. He had a copy of the program. He noted when I got my first job. He had written down my starting salary. He noted every time I had brought him a small gift for his birthday, every time I had called to check on him. He had a printout of an email I sent him once, thanking him for helping my mom with a car repair. It was a short, simple email. I didn't even remember sending it, but he had saved it. He had printed it out and put it in the binder. I spent hours in that office going through the binders. It was like watching my entire life from his perspective, the perspective of a silent observer. He saw everything. He heard everything. He just never said anything. and he kept receipts. Literally. There were binders dedicated to finances. He had records of every large sum of money he had given Mark and Sarah over the years. Loans that were never repaid, down payments for cars and apartments, lavish vacations he funded. He had calculated the total for each of them. The numbers were staggering. In the binder for the most recent year, there was a separate ledger. On one side, he listed the total amount he had given Mark. On the other, the total for Sarah. Underneath each total, he had written a single sentence: advance on inheritance. He had already given them their share, over and over again. They just hadn't realized it. Finally, at the very bottom of the box, there was a single sealed envelope. It just had my name on it. I opened it. Inside was a one-page letter. It was from Robert. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't a confession or an apology. It was a list of instructions. He explained the binders. He said he knew Mark and Sarah would contest the will. He wrote that the binders were my defense. They were not for the court. They were for me. They were proof. He said he did not reward disrespect and ingratitude. He said he valued responsibility and loyalty. He wrote that the inheritance was not a gift. It was a responsibility. He believed I was the only one who would handle it responsibly. The last line of the letter was simple. You earned this. Do not feel guilty. And then I started to cry. Not for the money, not for the house. I was crying for the little girl who just wanted a nod of approval. And I cried for the man who saw everything but never let on. The man I had lived with for 20 years and never really knew. He wasn't punishing them. He was holding them accountable. And he wasn't rewarding me. He was trusting me. It changed everything. I walked out of that lawyer's office a different person. The guilt was gone. The confusion was gone. It was replaced by a strange sense of clarity. I finally understood. The next day, I had Mr. Harris call their lawyer. I didn't want to fight them in court. I didn't want a long, ugly battle. My mom was still hoping for some kind of reconciliation. She urged me to offer them something, a settlement. She thought it would make things better. I knew it wouldn't. It would just prove their point. It would be an admission of a guilt I didn't have. So I made a different kind of offer. I told Mr. Harris to arrange a meeting with me, Mark, Sarah, and their lawyer. I had one condition. My mom couldn't be there. This had to be between us. They agreed. I think they assumed I was going to cave, that I was going to offer them a payout. We met at a neutral location, a conference room at a mediation center. They walked in looking smug. They sat across the table from me, arms crossed. Their lawyer looked confident. I didn't bring a lawyer. I just brought one thing, a box. It wasn't the original box Robert had left me. I had that in a safe place. I had spent the week making copies. I sat down. I didn't say hello. I slid the box across the table. Mark looked at it. He asked what it was. I told him it was a copy of my defense for the lawsuit. Their lawyer looked interested. He probably thought it was my financial records, things they could use against me. I told him they could have it, they could read it, they could use it in their lawsuit if they wanted to. But I told them that if they did, I would submit the original documents to the court, and then it would all be public record. Every loan, every lie, every time they disrespected their father, everything. Sarah laughed. She said I was bluffing. I just looked at her. I didn't say a word. Their lawyer, a practical man, opened the box. He pulled out the first binder. It was the one from the first year. He started flipping through the pages. I watched his face as he read. His expression changed from curiosity to surprise, then to concern. He handed the binder to Mark. Mark started reading. His smug expression disappeared. He saw the note about the school play, the note about my birthday party. He kept turning the pages faster and faster. He got to the financial records, the loans, the advances. His face went pale. Sarah snatched the binder from him. She started reading. Her reaction was different. She got angry. She accused me of forging the documents. She said her father would never do this. I just sat there, silent. I let them read. Their lawyer pulled out another binder, a more recent one. He found the records of their visit when Robert was sick, the short, infrequent visits. He found the notes about them being on their phones, about them complaining. He found the record of the one time Mark asked his dying father for money for a new watch. Robert had noted the date, the time, and the exact amount, and he noted that he had said no. The room was silent for a long time. The only sound was the turning of pages. They saw it all. Their whole lives laid out in their father's meticulous, undeniable handwriting. It wasn't an angry diary. It was a ledger, a balanced sheet of character, and their accounts were empty. Finally, their lawyer closed the last binder he was looking at. He looked at me, then he looked at Mark and Sarah. He advised them to drop the lawsuit. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that fell the moment their lawyer, a man named Peterson, sighed and closed his briefcase. The click of the latches was like a gavel. Final. It was over. Mark stared at the table. His hands, which had been balled into fists an hour ago, were flat on the polished wood, lifeless. He wasn't looking at the damning pages of Robert's ledger, the pages I had copied for them. He was looking at the wood grain, as if it held some secret, some answer that would make sense of it all. Sarah was worse. She had shrunk. The vibrant, righteous anger that had filled the room just hours before had evaporated, leaving behind something brittle and hollow. Her shoulders were slumped. Her face was pale, stripped of its usual confident gloss. She looked her age for the first time I could remember. They didn't look at me, not once. Their lawyer cleared his throat. "We will be in touch regarding the official withdrawal of the suit." His voice was professional, devoid of the aggressive certainty he'd had that morning. He was just a man doing a job, and his job was now to manage a surrender. He nudged Mark's arm. Nothing. He nudged him again, harder. Mark finally blinked, a focus returning from some distant, shattered place. He pushed his chair back, the sound scrapping against the floor. He stood, then Sarah stood, a puppet on his string. They moved like ghosts. They took up no space at all. For the first time in my life, they were the ones who were invisible. My mother was waiting in the hallway outside the mediation suite. She saw their faces first, and her own crumpled with a complicated grief. She looked from their vacant expressions to my still one. Her loyalty, always a tightrope walk between her daughter and the family she had married into, was finally snapping. She took a half step toward them, her hand lifting as if to offer comfort. Mark walked right past her. He didn't even see her. Sarah stopped. She looked at my mother, her eyes wide and wet. "You knew," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, a last desperate shot. "You knew what he was like, what he was doing." My mother flinched. "Sarah, You let him do this to us," she said, her voice cracking. Then she turned and hurried after her brother, leaving my mother standing alone in the sterile corridor. It was easier that way. Blaming her was easier than accepting the truth in those binders, the truth that they had done this to themselves. My mother finally turned to me. Her face was a mess of relief and sorrow. "Anna," she started, her voice thick. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" I asked. The words came out flat. I wasn't angry. I wasn't anything. I was just empty. For all of it. For them, for not seeing. She trailed off, gesturing vaguely back toward the room. I just nodded. There was nothing to say. We stood there for a moment, the two of us in the aftermath. The war was over. No one had won. It's been 3 weeks since that day the lawsuit was officially dropped. The paperwork arrived in a thick, emotionless envelope from my lawyer. Done. Finished. The threat stopped. The angry calls from cousin and old family friends tapered off, replaced by a deep, ringing silence. I am now officially a wealthy woman. The number doesn't feel real. It's an abstraction, a line of zeros on a bank statement that belongs to someone else. I haven't touched a penny of it. I haven't done anything. I've been living in a kind of stasis, caught between the past I finally understand and a future I never asked for. I'm at his house, Robert's house. My house, I guess. The air is stale. It smells of old paper, lemon polish, and him. A scent I never found comforting before. It was the smell of judgment, of quiet observation. Now it just smells like the truth. The movers cleared out his personal effects weeks ago, boxing them for Mark and Sarah per my instructions. They took the photos, the clothes, the few trinkets he'd allowed himself. They left the furniture. They left the silence. I walk into his study. This was the heart of his world, the room I was never invited into. It's spare. A heavy oak desk, a leather chair, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The shelves aren't filled with novels or poetry. They're filled with ledgers, decades of them, just like the ones he kept on his children. Business accounts, household expenses, investment portfolios. His entire life, quantified and recorded in his precise, unforgiving script. My footsteps echo on the hardwood floor. I run my hand over the back of his chair. The leather is cool and worn smooth. This is where he sat night after night and chronicled our lives. where he weighed and measured us. It was a balanced sheet of character, and their accounts were empty. I sit down in the chair. It feels too big for me. I pull open the top desk drawer. It's empty except for a single small black notebook. Not a ledger, something different. I pick it up. My name is on the cover, written in his hand. Anna. My breath catches. This wasn't with the binders. My lawyer never mentioned it. This was left here, for me to find. My hands are shaking as I open it. The first page isn't a list of numbers or a cold observation. It's a memory. October 1998, the back porch light, burnt out for a week. Mark said he'd fix it. Sarah said she'd call someone. Tonight, Anna, age 14, stood on a wobbly kitchen chair and fixed it herself. She didn't ask for thanks. She just saw a problem and solved it. I flipped the page. May 2003. Graduation. Mark and Sarah argued over who got the front row seats. Anna sat in the back with her mother. When her name was called, she was the only one who didn't look to the crowd for approval. She just walked the stage, got her diploma, and walked off. Head high, quietly proud. Page after page. Small things. Insignificant things that I had long forgotten. The time I weeded the garden because the gardener was sick. The time I paid for my own textbooks in college with my waitressing money because I didn't want to ask him for it. The time I brought him a cup of tea, unprompted, when he was working late on his taxes, and left it on his desk without a word. I had thought he never saw me. I was the footnote, the add-on. But he saw everything. He just never spoke. He wrote it down. He recorded my quiet acts of responsibility the same way he recorded his children's loud acts of entitlement. The last entry is from 6 months before he died. August 2023. Phone call with Anna. She asked if I needed anything, groceries, a ride to an appointment. I said no. She said, "Okay, Robert. Well, I'm here if you do." She has never asked me for anything, not in 25 years. She has only offered. Below that, the final sentence is underlined twice. Responsibility is not a burden to her. It is her nature. I close the notebook and hold it to my chest. The tears that I couldn't shed in the lawyer's office, in the mediation room in front of my mother, they finally come. They are not tears of sadness or of victory. They are tears of understanding. He wasn't punishing them. He wasn't rewarding me. He was balancing the ledger. This inheritance wasn't a gift. It was the logical conclusion to a lifetime of entries. It was a responsibility he was passing on to the only person he trusted with it. I stay in his chair for hours, watching the light fade outside the window. The house is no longer a monument to my exclusion. It's a quiet space filled with the silent man's respect. A respect I never knew I had, but which I now realize has shaped my entire life. The weight in my chest begins to shift. It is still heavy, but it is no longer the dead weight of guilt. It's the solid weight of purpose. I pick up my phone. I scroll through my contacts and find the name of my financial advisor. It's late, but I press the call button anyway. He answers on the second ring, his voice surprised. "Anna, is everything okay?" "Yes, David. Everything is fine," I say, and for the first time it feels true. "I'm ready to talk about the inheritance. I want to set up a foundation." "A foundation?" he asks, the surprise in his voice turning to professional interest. "For what?" I look around the study, at the shelves of ledgers, at the worn leather chair, at the small black notebook in my hand. "For the footnotes," I say. "For the quiet ones who fix the broken lights." The little notebook felt weightless in my hands, almost nothing. Just thin paper and a worn leather cover, but it held the entire weight of my life. 25 years of being seen when I thought I was invisible. Responsibility is not a burden to her. It is her nature. I read the last line again and again. The ink was slightly faded, the handwriting a familiar, precise script. Robert's script, the same one from the checks he wrote for my college tuition, the notes he left on the kitchen counter about a leaky faucet. Impersonal, factual, except this wasn't. This was the most personal thing anyone had ever written about me. The guilt that had lived under my skin for a year, a constant low-grade fever of apology, finally broke. It evaporated into the quiet air of the study. I didn't steal this inheritance. I didn't manipulate an old man. I had simply existed, and he had been watching. I closed the notebook and placed it on the desk, right next to the thick, damning ledgers of his biological children. The two sets of books, one for them, a balance sheet of their failures, and one for me, a quiet catalog of my character. It was so methodical, so Robert. He wasn't a man of hugs or praise, he was a man of evidence, and this was his final verdict. For the first time, I stood up in his house and didn't feel like an intruder. The silence was different now. It wasn't the tense, waiting silence of a place I didn't belong. It was calm, a quiet that was mine to fill. I walked out of the study. The hallway stretched before me, lined with photos. Mark on his first boat, Sarah at her debutante ball. The two of them flanking Robert at a charity dinner, their smiles wide and hungry. For years, I'd hurried past this gallery of a life that wasn't mine. I was the photographer of most of these moments, the one holding the camera just outside the frame. Now I stopped. I looked at Mark's face, frozen in a moment of manufactured triumph. I saw the arrogance Robert had documented in his ledgers, the casual assumption that the world owed him this boat, this life. I looked at Sarah, her arm looped through her father's, a gesture that looked like affection, but was really an act of possession. It felt performative, it always had. I felt nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, just a profound, hollow pity. They had been playing a game their whole lives, competing for a prize they thought was guaranteed. They never realized their father was the scorekeeper, and they were losing. I continued my slow walk through the house. My house. The word still felt foreign. I ran my hand along the cool marble of the fireplace mantel. I stopped in the formal dining room, with its long, polished table that could seat 20. We'd only ever used it on holidays. I'd always felt like a child at the adults' table, making sure not to spill anything, speaking only when spoken to. Now I imagined it set for a board meeting, the board of my foundation. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a sharp, intrusive sound. I knew who it was before I looked. My mother. I let it buzz a second time, then answered. I walked over to the tall windows overlooking the garden, the one I used to weed on Saturdays because the gardener always missed a spot near the roses. Anna, oh, thank God. Her voice was a frayed rope. I'm here, Mom. Are you all right? I've been calling. Sarah. She called me. She was screaming. I waited. The leaves on the old oak tree rustled in the wind. She said horrible things, my mother whispered. That I knew, that I let this happen, that I was in on it with you. A year ago, those words would have shattered me. I would have been desperate to fix it, to smooth the waters, to apologize for a crime I didn't commit. I would have absorbed her panic and made it my own, but I was no longer a sponge for everyone else's emotions. I'm sorry she said that to you, I said. My voice was even, calm. It sounded like a stranger's. Sorry, Anna, she's telling everyone we're thieves, that you're a monster. What are we going to do? We. There was no we, not anymore. There was me, and there was the responsibility Robert had given me. My mother was caught in the blast radius, but she was not in the crater with me. There's nothing to do, I said. Mark and Sarah dropped the lawsuit. It's over. But it's not over, she cried. This is family. You can't just win. You have to live with these people. No, I said, the word coming out sharp and clear. I don't, and neither do you. I paused, watching a bird land on a stone bird bath. Robert left me binders, Mom. Ledgers. He kept records of everything. Records? What are you talking about? He documented every dollar Mark and Sarah ever took from him, every lie they told, every time they treated him with disrespect. He called their loans advances on inheritance. He'd been disinheriting them for 20 years and they never knew it. The other end of the line was silent. I could picture my mother sitting in her small, tidy living room, her hand pressed to her mouth. He left me something else too, I continued, my voice softer now. A small notebook, just for me. He wrote down every time I did something he considered responsible. Fixing a loose doorknob, paying back my student loan early, visiting him in the hospital when they were in Aspen. I heard a small choked sound. He saw everything, Mom. He just didn't say it out loud, he wrote it down. Oh, Anna, she finally breathed. It was a sigh of comprehension, of grief, of a truth she'd lived alongside, but never been able to name. Your poor, quiet man. Your poor, quiet man, not our. She had loved him in her way, but she had never understood him. Not like this. Robert's language wasn't spoken, it was written in ink, on ledger paper. I want you to see them, I said, the notebooks, so you understand. I'm not the person Sarah says I am, and you don't have to defend me. The truth defends me. It was the first time in my life I had ever told my mother what to do. After we hung up, I stood by the window for a long time. The house was a fortress. Robert had built it, and then he had given me the keys. He had also given me the armor I needed to live inside it, the truth. I went back to the study, back to his desk. It was my desk now. The leather of the chair was cool against my skin. The surface was immaculate, holding only a pen holder, a blotter, and the notebooks. I pushed the ledgers of Mark and Sarah to one side. I placed a small personal notebook of my life right in the center. This was my mandate. I opened the top drawer. It was filled with heavy, cream-colored stationery, embossed with Robert's initials at the top. R.E.C., Robert Edward Covington. I took out a single sheet. It felt important, official. I took one of his fountain pens from the holder. It was heavy and cold, I thought for a moment. Then wrote at the top of the page, "The Footnote Foundation." The name felt right. It was an acknowledgement of where I came from, of all the quiet people, the observers, the ones just outside the frame, the ones who do the right thing when no one is watching, or when they think no one is watching. I started to write, not a business plan, not a mission statement, just a list. Scholarships for first-generation college students, grants for community caregivers, support for trade apprenticeships, practical things, responsible things, things that built a person up, not bailed them out, things Robert would have approved of. His approval was no longer a short nod I had to decipher. It was here, in the quiet confidence that settled in my bones. A thought surfaced unbidden. Mark and Sarah, what was my responsibility to them? The will was absolute. The law was on my side. Their father's own words had condemned them. I owed them nothing. But Robert was a man of ledgers, of final accountings. He didn't just cut them off, he documented why. The debt wasn't just morale, it was financial. The advances he'd recorded totaled millions. I wouldn't give them a handout. That would undo the entire lesson Robert had spent a lifetime trying to teach. But accountability was a two-way street. Perhaps a final statement was in order. A ledger of my own, not of their failings, but of their father's final, clear-eyed judgment. A single, final severance. I made a note at the bottom of my list. Send a final accounting. It was a cold, clean thought, a necessary one. I put the pen down. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The light slanted through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For 25 years, this house had been Robert's world. Now it was the start of mine. I wasn't the add-on anymore. I wasn't the footnote. I was the author. And this was the first page. The silence in my apartment is different now. It used to be a heavy blanket, something I'd pull over my head to hide from the world. A space filled with my own anxieties, my own smallness. Now the silence is just air, clean and clear. I can breathe in it. It's been 3 days since the mediation. 3 days since I watched the color drain from Mark's face, since Sarah's sharp, manicured hands trembled over the pages of her own history. They haven't called. My mother has, but I haven't answered. Not yet. I needed the quiet first. I needed to sit with Robert's final gift, not the money, the clarity. His second notebook, the small leather-bound one, sits on my coffee table. It never leaves my sight. I've read it a dozen times. His observations about me were recorded with the same dispassionate precision as Mark's request for a new car fund. October 12th. Anna replaced the worn weather stripping on the back door. Did not ask for reimbursement. Estimated savings on heating bill 8%, May 3rd, Mark's birthday. Anna brought a lemon cake, his favorite. He complained it wasn't from the expensive bakery downtown. She said nothing. Just cut the slices and served them. July 21st. Found Anna in the garden, weeding the rose bushes. She said she finds it calming. The thorns had torn her sleeves. It was a balance sheet of character. And for the first time, my account wasn't empty. It was overflowing. All the small things I did, the quiet ways I tried to earn my place, to be helpful, to be invisible. He had seen them all. He'd noted them down. He had assigned them value. I was not a footnote. I was a column in his ledger, entered in black ink. My phone rings again. It's my mother. This time, I answer. Anna? Oh, thank God, I was so worried. Her voice is thin, stretched taut. I'm fine, Mom. They dropped the lawsuit. Mark called me. He wasn't coherent. He just kept saying he saw everything. The old bastard saw everything. She lets out a shaky breath. What did you show them, honey? What was in those binders? I look at the box from Mr. Davies now sitting by my desk. A mausoleum of their own making. The truth, I say. It's the simplest answer. The only one that matters. Well, whatever it was, it's over. We can put this behind us. We can be a family again. The words hang in the air between us. A family again. As if we ever were one. As if their version of family wasn't a performance I was never given a script for. No, Mom, we can't. The silence on her end is louder than my own. What are you talking about? Anna, this is what you wanted. For the fighting to stop. I wanted the lies to stop. I correct her, my voice even. Calm. It's a new feeling. I'm done being the quiet apology in the corner of the room Robert didn't want me to be. Robert, honey, Robert was a cold man. You know that. He barely spoke to you. He didn't have to, I say, my gaze falling on his notebook. He was watching. I explain to her what I'm planning. The final accounting, a formal severance. She doesn't understand. She calls it cruel, unnecessary. She asks why I can't just let it go. Move on. She still sees them as the children of the man she loved, and me as the add-on, the peacekeeper. It was easier that way. They need to understand, I say, more to myself than to her. This isn't a punishment, it's a receipt. We hang up. We are not fighting, not really, but a new distance has opened up between us. She is on the shore of the old world, waving. I am in a boat, rowing toward a new one. I don't think she can follow me here. The next day, I meet with Mr. Davies. His office is just as sterile, just as quiet, but I feel different sitting in the leather chair this time. I'm not sinking into it, I'm occupying it. A final accounting, he says, steepling his fingers. He looks at me over his glasses, a flicker of something, approval perhaps in his eyes. An interesting, and I might say appropriate choice of words. What do you intend for it to include? Everything, I say. I spend the afternoon with a paralegal he assigns to me. Her name is Rose. She is young, efficient, and asks no questions. Together, we go through the binders. We don't copy the personal observations, not the entries about their disrespect or their callousness. That was for their eyes only, a private shame. This is business. We scan and print every single page that has a $sign on it. Every loan for a failed startup. Every down payment for a luxury car. Every 5-figure credit card bailout. Every check Robert wrote, annotated in his severe, precise script. Advance on inheritance. The stack of paper grows. It is shockingly thick. A decade of entitlement printed in black and white. On a separate sheet, we create a summary, a simple table. Mark. Total advances received $1,847,312.54. Sarah. Total advances received $2,109,550.88. Below that, another line. Anna. Total advances received $0. Mr. Davies had already explained the legality of it. Robert's classification of the funds as advances was ironclad. They had in effect already received their share of the inheritance. More than their share, if you calculated for interest, which Robert, in a final act of what I could only call mercy, had not. The final piece is the check. Mr. Davies' office has already liquidated a small portion of the estate's assets. I write 2 cashier's checks. My hand doesn't shake. I think about the numbers, about the sheer, staggering waste, and then I think about the footnote foundation, about the quiet people who replace weather stripping, who bake cakes that get rejected, who weed gardens because it calms them, the people who do the right thing when no one is watching, or so they think. I write a check to Mark for $1. I write a check to Sarah for $1. It felt correct. A final transaction. The closing of a ledger that had been open for far too long. We package it all in 2 thick manila envelopes, the summary sheet on top, then the reams of documentation. The cashier's check is paper clipped to the front, a single dismissive $1. I write their names on the front. Mark's at his glass-walled condo downtown. Sarah's at the sprawling suburban house Robert's money had paid for. I don't write a return address. They will know who it's from. That evening, I drive to a central post office, one far from my apartment. I don't want to just drop them in a mailbox on a corner. This requires a small ceremony, a final act. I hold the 2 envelopes in my hands. They feel heavy, not with paper, but with the weight of 2 decades. 2 decades of me trying to be small enough to fit into the cracks of their lives, of me absorbing their casual cruelty, their loud demands, their absolute certainty that the world belonged to them. Robert's inheritance wasn't just money, it was a shield, it was a voice. It was his final silent nod of approval, the one I had waited my entire life for. He had balanced the books. I slide the first envelope into the mail slot. It thuds softly as it lands inside, then the second. Done. I walk out of the post office into the cool night air. The city lights seem brighter. The sounds of traffic are no longer a source of anxiety, but a kind of urban symphony. I feel no anger, no triumph, just a profound and unshakable sense of peace. The accounting was final. The debt was paid. My own ledger was clear, and I was finally ready to write in it. The checks are in the mail. It's a simple declarative sentence, a fact. But it feels like the end of a war fought entirely inside my own head. The final document signed, the last shot fired. A single dollar for Mark, a single dollar for Sarah. Sent with the cold, itemized accounting of every dollar they had already taken. The silence that followed was the first thing I noticed. For a week there was nothing. No angry calls, no threatening emails from their new, less expensive lawyer. Just a profound, unnerving quiet. It was the quiet I had always craved. The absence of their noise, their demands, their sheer gravitational pull that had warped every room they entered. It was the quiet of Robert's house after they'd left for the weekend, a space I could finally breathe in. But it was different now. It was a choice, my choice. I spent the week in my small apartment, the one I'd kept even after Robert's death. It was my territory, my safe harbor. The binders were gone, sent back to the lawyer's office for safekeeping, but their contents were seared into my memory. Robert's small, neat handwriting, the brutal math of his children's character. I started sketching out ideas for the foundation. I bought a new notebook, a simple one with a plain black cover. Not like Robert's, but it felt right. On the first page, I wrote the name. The Footnote Foundation. It wasn't an act of bitterness. It was an act of reclamation for all the people who did the right thing when no one was watching. The quiet ones, the observers, the ones who held things together while others took the credit. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. My stomach tightened, a reflexive, conditioned response. Years of bracing for impact. I let it sit for a full minute before I picked it up. You think this is over? You stole our father's money and now you send us a joke? You'll pay for this, Anna. You have no idea. It was Mark, all bluster and empty threats. I read the words. I saw the rage, the wounded pride, the sheer disbelief that his power had evaporated. But the words didn't land. They were just pixels on a screen. A ghost trying to haunt a house that was no longer his. I remembered Robert's entry about Mark's first car, the one Robert had paid for. A week later, Mark had demanded another $2,000. For performance upgrades, Dad, it's an investment in the asset. Robert had noted, in his dry, factual way, asset depreciated 20% upon leaving the lot. Performance upgrades consist of a louder muffler and cosmetic rims, a request for noise, not value. Advance logged. Mark was still just a request for noise. I deleted the message, I blocked the number. It was that simple. There was no need for a reply. The final accounting was my reply. Robert's accounting. 2 days later, Sarah called. Her name flashed on the screen, and for a second, I felt a different kind of dread. Mark was a storm you could see coming. Sarah was a change in barometric pressure. She dealt in guilt, not anger. Her weapon was the performance of a shared history that never really existed. I answered, I don't know why. Maybe to prove to myself that I could. Anna? Her voice was soft, laced with a manufactured sorrow. It was the same voice she used at the funeral, the one that said, look at my grief. It is the most important grief here. Sarah, I said, my voice was level, flat, an empty field where she had expected to find cover. I got your letter, she said, and the check. She let out a small, watery laugh. $1, after everything. I don't understand how you can be so cruel. I waited. I didn't fill the silence. That was her job. He was our father, Anna. Our father. You were Mom's daughter. We let you into our family. Let me in. Like I was a stray they'd agreed to feed on the back porch. The words hung there, more revealing than she could ever know. They had never seen me as part of the architecture, just a temporary guest who had overstayed her welcome. Robert made his own choices, Sarah, I said. The words felt clean in my mouth. True. He was sick, she insisted, her voice rising, the soft performance cracking. He wasn't thinking clearly. You took advantage. You sat there, so quiet, acting like you wanted nothing, and you were planning this the whole time. I thought of the notebook, Robert's personal one. She asked for nothing. She is the only one who asked for nothing. The lawsuit is over, Sarah, I said, my voice still quiet. You saw the ledgers. You know why he did it. Those were just family matters. That's what families do. They help each other. You wouldn't understand. There it was again. The exclusion. The final, desperate attempt to put me back in my box. He saw it differently, I said. He saw it as a balance sheet, and your accounts were empty. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. I had used his language, the language of facts and figures. It was like speaking an incantation she had no defense against. You'll regret this, she whispered, the last of her performance dissolving into pure, unvarnished spite. You'll be all alone with that money, and you'll deserve it. She hung up. I set the phone down. Alone. She said it like a curse. But for the first time, it sounded like a promise. A new beginning. And the final piece was my mother. She called the next day. Her voice was strained. Anna, honey, can we meet? Please. We met at a small, neutral coffee shop halfway between my apartment and her house. The house Robert had left me. The house I hadn't set foot in since the day I found the binders. She was already there when I arrived, twisting a paper napkin into a shredded mess. She looked older. The stress of being caught in the middle had carved new lines around her eyes. She loved me. I knew that. But she had also spent 25 years navigating the currents of Robert's world, and Mark and Sarah were a tide she was used to swimming with, not against. They're a mess, Anna, she said, before I'd even sat down. No hello. Just a problem. I stirred my coffee. They'll be fine, Mom. Fine? Mark lost his car. He couldn't make the payment. Sarah might have to sell her house. Your father, Robert, he supported them. That was the arrangement. The arrangement was that they were supposed to become responsible adults, I said, looking at her directly. Robert's ledgers made that clear. She flinched at the word ledgers. It was the unassailable truth she couldn't argue with. But to leave them with nothing, it's humiliating. That $1 check, it was just mean. It was symbolic, I corrected her gently. It was the formal end to the transaction. They got their inheritance, Mom. Years ago, in advances. Robert was just closing the books. She shook her head, looking down at her mangled napkin. They're your family, Anna. The words were a dull ache, a familiar refrain from a song I didn't want to hear anymore. No, I said, and the single word felt more powerful than any argument. You are my family. Robert. Robert became my family. Mark and Sarah were the children of the man my mother married. We lived in the same house. That's all. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. It was the first time I had ever defined the relationship on my own terms. The first time I hadn't accepted the label they'd given me. He loved you, you know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Robert, in his way, he didn't know how to show it. He respected you so much. He always told me Anna sees things. She doesn't miss a trick. I nodded slowly. I knew that now. I had the proof. But hearing it from her was different. It was a bridge. A small one over a vast canyon, but it was there. I know, Mom. So can't you just help them a little? She pleaded. For me, to keep the peace. And there it was, the fundamental difference between us. Her life was about keeping a fragile peace. My new life had to be about honoring a difficult truth. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Her skin was cold. I can't, I said. It wasn't an apology. It was a statement of fact. Robert didn't give me his money to fix his children. He gave it to me because I wasn't them. If I give them one more dollar, I'm undoing the one thing he tried to do, the one choice he made. I took a breath. You chose your family a long time ago, Mom. I understand that. Now Robert has chosen his. The finality in my voice settled between us. She pulled her hand away, not in anger, but in resignation. She understood. She didn't like it, and it hurt her, but she understood that I was no longer the quiet, agreeable girl who would absorb the family's dysfunction to make her life easier. We finished our coffee in silence. It wasn't comfortable, but it was honest. When we left, she hugged me tightly. "Take care of yourself, Anna," she said. "You too, Mom." As I walked back to my car, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel righteous. I just felt clear. The fog of guilt, of obligation, of wondering if I was the monster they claimed I was, it was gone. All that was left was a quiet sadness for my mother, trapped between the past and a future she couldn't control. But I couldn't live there with her. Back in my apartment, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was light. It was potential. It was a blank page. I opened a new notebook. I looked at the title. The Footnote Foundation. Sarah was wrong. I wasn't alone with the money. I was with Robert's legacy. His final, carefully written entry. I was with the quiet, overlooked people this money would now serve. I was finally with myself, and I was ready to begin. The silence is the first thing I notice. For months, my life had been a cacophony. The shrill ring of the phone, the ping of aggressive emails from lawyers I'd never met, the booming accusatory voices of Mark and Sarah replaying in my head. It was a constant noise, a grinding engine of their fury and my guilt. Now it's gone. The checks were in the mail. A single dollar for each of them. Final. A period at the end of a sentence I hadn't written, but was now forced to punctuate. The lawsuit was officially withdrawn. A sterile document signed and filed, dissolving their claim on me, on Robert's legacy. I sit in Robert's study. It's been 3 days since the final papers were signed. I haven't moved much. I just sit in his worn leather chair, the one that still holds the faint scent of his pipe tobacco and old books. The air is still. The house is a tomb, but not a sad one, a quiet one, a place of rest. I look at the binders, stacked neatly on the edge of the mahogany desk. Robert's ledgers, my vindication. For the first time, they don't feel like a weapon. They feel like a history book. The story was over. My phone buzzes on the desk, a text. For a split second, the old anxiety floods back. A phantom limb of dread. I flinch. But it's not them. It's my mother. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I'm worried. I stare at the words. My thumbs hover over the screen. The old Anna would have replied immediately. "I'm fine, Mom. Don't worry. How are you?" She would have managed her mother's feelings, eased her anxiety, taken responsibility for the unease she had caused. I am not the old Anna. I set the phone face down on the desk. I will answer her, but not yet. Not until I have my own answer for "Am I okay?" I wasn't sure. The guilt was gone, yes, the fear was gone. But in their place was a vast, terrifying emptiness, an open field with no path. Robert had given me a map to the past. He hadn't left one for the future. The Footnote Foundation. The words had come to me in a flash of anger and clarity. Now, in the silence, they feel audacious, presumptuous. Who was I to build a foundation? I was a librarian. I organized things that other people created. I put books on shelves. I didn't write them. I turned to Robert's computer. It's an old desktop, but it boots up with a quiet, efficient hum, just like him. His desktop is immaculate. A few folders neatly labeled. Finances, household, estate. No personal photos, no clutter. I open a web browser. The cursor blinks in the search bar, a taunting, rhythmic pulse. My fingers feel heavy, clumsy. I type. How to start a charitable foundation. The results are a tidal wave of information. Legal structures, tax implications, mission statements, board of directors. It's a foreign language, LLCS and 501c3s. Bylaws and endowments. I feel a familiar wave of inadequacy wash over me. I'm an imposter, a footnote, playing at being a headline. I close my eyes. I see Robert's handwriting in the secret notebook. Anna cleaned the gutters. No one asked her to. I see the entry about me paying back the $20 he loaned me for gas, with $1 for interest he never asked for. He didn't leave his fortune to a CEO or a financial wizard. He left it to me, the quiet girl who cleaned the gutters, the one who balanced her own small ledger. He trusted my character, not my expertise. I take a deep breath. I click the first link. I start reading. I spend the rest of the day and the next in that study. I don't just read, I learn. I take notes in a fresh notebook, my own handwriting a stark contrast to Robert's rigid script. I fill pages with questions for Mr. Henderson. I start to draft a mission statement, the words clunky and imperfect, to provide resources for individuals who are overlooked, for the quiet ones who contribute without praise, the footnotes. It feels right. The emptiness begins to fill, not with noise, but with purpose. 2 days later, my mother shows up at the door. She doesn't knock loudly, just a soft, hesitant tapping. When I open it, she looks smaller than I remember. Her face is etched with worry. "You didn't answer my text," she says. "It's not an accusation, just a statement of fact." "I'm sorry, Mom. I've been busy." I lead her into the kitchen. The whole house is still packed in boxes. It's a museum of a life I'm not sure what to do with. She sits at the small kitchen table, her hands clutching her purse in her lap. "I spoke to Sarah," she says, her voice barely a whisper. I stop. I keep my back to her, pretending to fill the kettle. "Oh?" She's a wreck, Anna. They're losing their house. Mark's business partner pulled out. He said Mark's reputation is tarnished. I say nothing. The water runs into the kettle, a steady, indifferent stream. "She said they got a check from your lawyer for $1. My mother's voice cracks. Was that really necessary? It felt so cruel. I turn off the water. I place the kettle on the stove and turn to face her. I lean back against the counter, crossing my arms. It's a posture I've seen Robert use 1,000 times, solid, unmovable. "It was necessary," I say. My voice is even, calm. "It was a legal formality to show that their claim to the inheritance was considered and dismissed. It prevents them from ever trying to claim they were forgotten. But the amount, Anna, it was meant to hurt them. Maybe," I concede, "or maybe it was just a number. Like the $2.7 million Robert documented as their advances. That was just a number too, a much larger one." My mother flinches, as if the number itself had struck her. "It's not the same." "Isn't it?" I walk to the table and sit down opposite her. I don't raise my voice. I don't need to. "For 25 years, you asked me to be the bigger person, to be quiet, to not make waves, to absorb their cruelty and entitlement because it was easier that way. I did it. I did it for you. But I'm not doing it anymore." Tears well in her eyes. "They're my family too." "They were," I correct her gently. "But they made a choice. They chose to believe I was a thief. They chose to sue me. They chose to drag Robert's name and mine through the mud. And choices have consequences. Robert knew that. It's the entire reason we're sitting here." I reach across the table and place my hand over hers. Her skin is cold. "I love you, Mom. But my responsibility is no longer to manage their feelings. Or yours. My responsibility is to honor the trust Robert placed in me. That is my only job now." She pulls her hand away, not angrily, just retreating. She looks around the kitchen, at the life that was, at the daughter she no longer fully recognizes. "What are you going to do?" she asks. "I'm going to do what he would have wanted," I say. "I'm going to be useful." She leaves soon after. The conversation is over. A boundary has been tested and has held. It doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like a necessary amputation. Painful, but clean. That night, I get a text from a number I don't recognize. "I hope you're happy. I hope you're enjoying our father's house, our father's money. You tore this family apart. You're a snake. He was a fool to ever let you in. It must be Sarah. It has her brand of toothless, pathetic venom. The old Anna would have felt a spike of pain. Her words would have found the last remaining pocket of guilt and burrowed deep. But there are no pockets left. Robert's ledgers cleaned them all out. I look at the message. I feel nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Just a profound, weary sadness for her. She still doesn't get it. She never will. She thinks I took something from her. She can't understand that she and Mark gave it all away, one entitled demand at a time. I don't reply. I simply delete the message. I block the number. I go back to the study. The blinking cursor on the screen no longer feels like a taunt. It feels like an invitation. I pull my notebook closer. I pick up my pen. The house is silent around me, but my mind is clear. I am not a footnote. I am the executor, and I have work to do. The silence is a tangible thing. It has weight and shape, filling the spaces previously occupied by angry voicemails and venomous text. For the first 24 hours, I kept checking my phone, a nervous tick, a habit learned over a year of being under siege. I'd see the screen, dark and placid, and a jolt of adrenaline would hit me, the phantom limb of an old anxiety. But no one calls, no one texts. I blocked their numbers, Mark's, Sarah's. I blocked their email addresses. I blocked them on the one social media platform I still used. With a few quiet taps, I had erected a digital wall. It was a simple action, yet it felt as monumental as shoving a boulder into a doorway. It felt final. They are gone, just like that. The quiet isn't peaceful. Not at first, it's just loud. A ringing in my ears where the noise used to be. I walk through my small apartment, the one I kept even after the will was read, and the silence follows me. It feels like I'm holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for them to find a new way in, a registered letter, a process server for some new imagined legal slight. But by the third day, the ringing in my ears begins to fade. The silence softens. It's no longer an absence of noise, but a presence of calm. I make coffee in the morning, and the only sound is the gurgle of the machine. I read a book, and the only voice is the one in my head. I am alone. And for the first time in my life, it feels like a victory. On the fourth day, my mother calls. Her name flashes on the screen, and I don't feel the familiar pang of dread. I don't feel the need to rehearse my apologies or justifications. I feel nothing but a steady, quiet resolve. I answer. Anna. Her voice is strained, thin. Hi, Mom. I just got off the phone with Sarah. Of course she did. I take a sip of my now lukewarm coffee. I wait. I've learned the power of waiting. Robert taught me that. Silence makes people reveal themselves. She was beside herself. My mother continues, filling the space I left for her. She told me what you did, the checks. Anna, $1? How could you be so cruel? There it is. The accusation I've been hearing my whole life, in one form or another. Why are you being difficult? Why can't you just make things easier? The old me would have crumbled. The old me would have said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It was the lawyer's idea. The new me takes a breath. It wasn't cruel, Mom. It was a legal formality. It was closure. It was humiliating. You humiliated them. They spent a year trying to ruin my life, I say, my voice even. Not loud, not angry. Just a statement of fact. They accused me of theft, of coercion, of elder abuse. They called me names I won't repeat to you. They did that to themselves. The humiliation is their own. A sharp sigh on the other end of the line. But they're your family. The words hang in the air. The old argument, the one that held me captive for decades. No, I say, and the word is so solid in my mouth. They're not. They were Robert's children. They were your stepchildren. To me, they were the people I had to tiptoe around for 20 years. They were a condition of my living situation. That's all. Anna, that's a terrible thing to say. Is it? Or is it just the first honest thing I've ever been allowed to say about it? I stand up and walk to the window, looking down at the street. People are walking, living their lives, completely unaware of the tectonic plates shifting in mine. Robert saw it. He saw it for decades. He wrote it all down. He knew they weren't family. They were liabilities. His note to me said he was leaving his estate to the only person who acted like family, the person who was responsible. I hear her crying now, soft, frustrated sobs. It's the sound of her own helplessness. She wanted peace, but her peace always came at my expense. I just want everyone to get along, she whispers. I know you do, I say, and my voice softens because I do love her. I love the woman who tried her best, even when her best wasn't enough. But we can't, because they don't see me as a person. They see me as an obstacle, and I'm done being an obstacle. I'm done being anything to them at all. I pause, letting her absorb it. I love you, Mom, but my conversations about Mark and Sarah are over. This was the last one. I will not talk about them with you again. If you call, we can talk about your garden or the weather or that new show you like, but we will not talk about them. Do you understand? It is the hardest boundary I have ever set. The silence on her end stretches for a long, painful moment. I can feel her choosing. Choose the fantasy of a happy blended family, or choose the reality of the daughter standing right in front of her. Okay, Anna, she says finally, her voice thick. Okay. It's not a victory. It's not a surrender. It's a truce. And for now, it's enough. After we hang up, I don't feel angry. I don't feel triumphant. I just feel clear, like a windshield after a heavy rain. I find myself driving to Robert's house. My house, I correct myself. The thought is still foreign. The keys feel heavy and important in my hand. I let myself in. The air is still and smells faintly of his pipe tobacco and old books. It's not a ghost haunting the place. It's an echo, a memory. I walk past the living room where they all held court, past the dining room of 100 silent, tense dinners. I go straight to his study. This was his sanctuary, the one room where the noise of his family was not allowed to enter. I run my hand over the dark wood of his desk. This is where he sat night after night and balanced the ledgers, the financial ledgers and the other one, the one that balanced character. I used to see this room as a fortress, a place Robert retreated to, away from us, away from me. Now I see it differently. It wasn't a retreat, it was an observation post. He wasn't hiding from the world, he was documenting it. He was a man of facts and figures, and he applied the same dispassionate logic to his family that he did to his stock portfolio. His approval wasn't a hug or a kind word. It was a balanced account. And my account, I now knew, was in good standing. I sit in his worn leather chair. It still holds the faint impression of him. It doesn't feel like I'm trespassing anymore. It feels like I've been invited. On the corner of the desk is a stack of fresh legal pads and a row of perfectly sharpened pencils. His tools, order, precision, clarity. I pull one of the pads toward me. The paper is thick, creamy white. I pick up a pencil. The graphite is sharp, ready. For a moment, I just look at the blank page, a whole new ledger. My ledger. A future that isn't a footnote in someone else's story. Then I begin to write. At the top of the page, in firm, clear letters, I print the words. The Footnote Foundation. It looks right. It feels like purpose. Beneath it, I start a new heading. Mission. My hand moves, the pencil scratching softly in the quiet room. The words come easily, as if they've been waiting there all along. To find and fund the quiet people, the footnotes, the observers who carry the weight without complaint, the ones who show up, do the work, and expect nothing, the responsible ones. I write for over an hour. I outline programs for scholarships, for small business grants, for emergency aid. I think of the nursing assistant who was so kind to Robert in his final weeks. I think of the librarian who always remembered my name. I think of a younger version of myself, the girl who did her chores plus her stepbrothers just to keep the peace. This isn't about charity. It's about investment. Robert's final lesson. He didn't give me a gift. He made an investment. He trusted me to be a responsible steward of his life's work. He trusted me to understand the balance sheet. I will not let him down. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the study. The pages in front of me are filled with plans, with ideas, with a future. Robert's money, his legacy, was the key. But I'm the one opening the door. The house is quiet, my phone is quiet, my mind is quiet, and I am no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm busy building a place to put it. The silence was the strangest part. For months, my life had been a cacophony. The shrill ring of the phone, always heralding a new threat from Mark or a tearful, pleading monologue from Sarah. The sharp, accusatory tone of their lawyer in emails that landed like punches. The frantic buzzing in my own head, a constant hum of guilt and fear. Now there was nothing. The $1 checks had been mailed a week ago. Certified mail. I have the delivery confirmation receipts filed away in a new binder of my own. It felt like a necessary finality, a closing entry in a ledger that had been open for far too long. I expected something. A final, desperate phone call, a furious misspelled text message, maybe even an unannounced visit. a last-ditch attempt to hammer on my door and my conscience. But the days passed and the silence held. It was vast and empty, like a house that has finally been cleared of unwanted guests. At first, it was unnerving. I kept checking my phone, my body still braced for a fight. But slowly, the tension in my shoulders began to unknot. The quiet started to feel less like an absence and more like a presence. It felt like peace. My mother was the one to finally break it. Her name flashed on my screen, and for a second, the old anxiety flared. I took a breath. I was not the same person I was a month ago. I answered, "Anna, honey." Her voice was tentative, walking on eggshells. "Hi, Mom." I heard from Sarah." I waited. I didn't ask what she said. I didn't need to. I just listened to the static on the line, the space my mother was trying to fill. "She's not doing well, Anna. She said you sent her a check for $1. Her voice was thick with a disappointment I knew was aimed at me. The familiar guilt tried to prick at my conscience. The old Anna would have apologized. She would have explained, justified, tried to make her mother feel better. The new Anna stayed quiet. "She said it was cruel," Mom continued, her voice gaining a slight edge. "A slap in the face after everything." "Was it?" I asked. My tone wasn't defensive. It was a genuine question. The question surprised her into a moment of silence. "Well, I mean, it seems that way. To them. They've lost their father, their home. They got exactly what Robert's ledger said they were owed," I stated. It wasn't an argument, it was a fact. As simple and solid as the numbers in his tidy columns. He considered their request advances. He documented them as such. I was just settling the account. But it's not about accounting, is it? It's about family. The word hung in the air. Family. For years, that word had been used as a cudgel, a reason for me to be quiet, to be accommodating, to shrink, a reason to accept their casual dismissals and my place at the kids' table, even as an adult. "Mom," I said, and my voice was gentle but firm. Colder than I intended, maybe. "Robert made it about accounting. He did that for 20 years. I'm just honoring his system." I paused, picturing her, in her small, tidy kitchen, twisting the phone cord in her fingers. They sued me. They called me a thief and a whore. They threatened to ruin my life. The family you're talking about. I was never really a part of it. Robert knew that. Now I do too. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing. A soft, defeated sigh. "So that's it? You're just cutting them out?" "I'm closing the book," I said. "It's what Robert wanted." It was the first time I'd ever ended a conversation with her, instead of letting it trail off into uneasy silence. I said goodbye, told her I loved her, and hung up. My hand was perfectly steady. It was a boundary, a line drawn not in sand, but in ink. It felt clean. That evening, I walked through Robert's house. My house. For the first few weeks, I'd camped out in the guest room, the same one I'd used for holiday visits. It was the only space that felt even remotely mine. The rest of the house was a museum of a life I'd only witnessed. The heavy oak furniture, the photos of Mark and Sarah as children, the faint, lingering scent of Robert's pipe tobacco in his study. It was all theirs, but it wasn't, not anymore. I walked into his study, the heart of the house and the source of all this upheaval. The leather chair behind the desk was cold. I ran my hand over the dark, polished wood of the desk itself. This was where he sat, night after night, recording the facts, a car for Mark, a down payment for Sarah, a new roof for my mother and me, logged under home maintenance, not as a debt. A quiet $500 check to me after my old car died, noted simply as gift, unsolicited. It was a balance sheet of character, and their accounts were empty. On the corner of the desk, beneath a heavy glass paperweight, was a small worn photograph I'd never seen before. It wasn't of his children. It was of him and my mother, taken years ago. They were on a beach somewhere. He was actually smiling. A real smile, not the tight, formal line he reserved for family portraits. His arm was around my mother, and he was looking at her with an expression of such unguarded affection, it made my throat ache. He wasn't just a stern arbiter. He wasn't just a man of ledgers. He was a man who had loved my mother, a man who had chosen to build a life with her, and by extension with me. He had chosen to take me in, and in the end, he had chosen to trust me. Not out of spite for his children, but because of what he saw in me. The guilt was gone, all of it. In its place was a profound sense of responsibility. This house, this money, it wasn't a prize. It was a tool. It was the final silent instruction from a man who communicated only through action. The next morning, I met with the lawyer, my lawyer, not Robert's, to finalize the charter for the Footnote Foundation. The name felt right. It was an acknowledgement of my past, but also a redefinition of it. A footnote is easy to overlook, but it often holds the most crucial information, the detail that changes the meaning of the entire text. The mission is simple, I explained, sliding a piece of paper across the polished table. We'll provide grants for people who do the right thing when no one is watching. Caregivers for elderly parents, neighborhood volunteers, people who pay their debts, who show up, who are reliable, the quiet people, the footnotes. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Miss Davies, read my summary. She looked up, her expression unreadable. It's an unusual mission statement. Most foundations focus on more measurable outcomes. Character is measurable, I said, thinking of Robert's ledgers. It just requires careful observation. She nodded slowly, a small smile touching her lips. I see, a foundation for the footnotes. I like it. We spent the next 2 hours working through the legal framework. It felt good, productive, a world away from the sterile mediation rooms and angry depositions. This was creation, not destruction. This was building something from the ashes of a family that had set itself on fire. Later that week, a piece of mail arrived. It was a thick, glossy catalog from a high-end real estate agency, addressed to Mark. It had been forwarded from his old address, the one Robert had paid for. I almost threw it away, but then I stopped. I put it on the kitchen counter, looking at the absurdly luxurious mansions on the cover. I thought of Mark, with his loud voice and easy confidence, a confidence underwritten entirely by his father. I imagined him now, his credit cards declined, his sure-thing business ventures revealed to be hollow, his sense of entitlement crashing against the hard wall of reality. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, just a quiet, clinical pity. He was a man who had been given every advantage and had squandered it all, never realizing the well had a bottom. I picked up the catalog and walked it to the recycling bin. I let it drop. The sound was small, insignificant. He was no longer my problem. Sarah was no longer my problem. Their anger, their ruin, it was all their own. A debt they had finally been called to pay. I went back to the study and sat in Robert's chair. It didn't feel so cold anymore. I looked at the empty desk, the clean slate. The past was settled. The ledgers were closed. My own was just beginning. And I knew, with a certainty that was as calm and deep as the silence in the house, that I was going to make it count. It's been a month since the mediation, a month since I walked out of that sterile conference room and left Mark and Sarah to drown in the silence of their own history. The air in Robert's house, my house, has changed. It's lighter. The oppressive weight of their voices, their expectations, their ghosts is gone. I had the entire house professionally cleaned, from the baseboards to the chandeliers, not just for the dust, but for the residue. It felt like an exorcism. The study is my sanctuary now. It used to be a place I would never enter without an invitation, a room that smelled of old paper and quiet judgment. Now it smells of fresh coffee and my own perfume. The mahogany desk is cleared of Robert's things. His pens are in a cup. His reading glasses are folded on a shelf. They are relics, not tools. My laptop sits in the center of the vast leather blotter, its clean silver lines a stark contrast to the dark, heavy wood. The binders are gone. I had them professionally archived and stored in a climate-controlled facility. They'd served their purpose. They were a verdict, and the sentence had been carried out. In their place on the shelves are new binders, white ones. The crisp labels are printed in a simple, clean font. The Footnote Foundation, Charter and Bylaws. The Footnote Foundation, Grant Applications, Cycle 1. I spend my days here on the phone with lawyers and accountants, but these are different lawyers. They don't talk about contesting wills or hostile depositions. They talk about 501c3 status and endowment strategies. They use words like perpetuity and impact. They are building something, not tearing it down. At first, my voice would shake when I spoke to them. The old habit of apology, of making myself smaller. A 36-year-old woman asking for permission. But the woman on the other end of the line, a philanthropy advisor named Evelyn Albright, was patient. She listened. She never once made me feel like an imposter. The mission statement is the soul of the foundation, Anna, she told me last week. Her voice was calm, practical. What is it you want to do? I looked at the empty chair across the desk, Robert's chair. I thought of the ledgers. I thought of the 22 years of quiet effort, of fixing the leaky faucet, of remembering his favorite brand of tea, of showing up on time, every time, the things no one else noticed. I want to find the others, I said. My voice was steady, clear. The ones in the footnotes, the quiet ones who do the right thing when no one is watching, the caregivers, the night school students, the people who prop up their families and never ask for a thing. I want to give them the one thing they never get, acknowledgement. Evelyn was silent for a moment. That, she finally said, is a very strong soul. My phone rang this afternoon. The screen flashed. Mom. The familiar knot in my stomach tightened for a second, a ghost of an old reflex. Then it dissolved. I answered. Hi, Mom. Anna, honey, just calling to see how you are. Her voice was tentative, like someone walking on a floor they suspect is weak. We hadn't spoken much since my one firm boundary was drawn. Do not talk to me about them. I'm good. Busy, I said. I swiveled in Robert's chair, looking out the window at the garden. The roses were blooming. I'd have to learn how to prune them. Oh, that's good. Busy is good. A pause. I could hear her gathering her courage. I knew what was coming. I just ran into Carol Ann at the market. You remember Sarah's friend? I didn't say anything. I just waited. The silence was my answer. Well, she pushed on, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She said things are difficult. Mark had to sell his boat, and Sarah had to pull her kids out of that expensive private school. I closed my eyes. I pictured the ledger. June 12th, 2011. Advance on inheritance, $45,000. For down payment on Mastercraft X30. Reason given, Dad, you only live once. The boat wasn't his to begin with. It was just another loan against a line of credit he thought was infinite. Mom, I said. My voice was gentle, but as unyielding as granite. What did we agree on? She let out a long, shaky sigh. It was the sound of a woman caught between two worlds. The one she'd lived in for decades, where Mark and Sarah were the suns, and I was a distant, forgotten moon, and this new one, where the universe had been turned inside out. I know, honey. I know. It's hard to hear. They're struggling. They have what they earned, I said simply. It wasn't cruel. It was a fact. It was a line item from Robert's final balance sheet. Their accounts are settled. But they're your... She stopped herself. She couldn't say family. The word hung in the air between us, a lie we had both agreed to stop telling. No, they're not, I said. Not anymore. My life is here now, Mom. In this house, with this work, that is what I am focused on. If you want to talk about that, I would love to talk. But their life is no longer a part of mine. I can't make that any clearer. It was the most honest thing I'd ever said to her. It was liberating, and it was lonely. Okay, Anna, she whispered. Okay, honey, I understand. She didn't. Not really, but she would learn. We ended the call, and I was left with the quiet hum of the computer. I wasn't angry. I felt a deep, profound sadness for her. She was mourning a family that had never really existed. I had been mourning it my whole life. The difference was I was done. A few days ago, I was closing out the primary estate account, preparing to transfer the bulk of the funds into the foundation's endowment. I was scrolling through the final transactions, a list of legal fees and closing costs, and then I sold them. 2 small debits posted on the same day. Check number 1041, cashed, amount $1. Check number 1042, cashed, amount $1. They took it. Of course they did. I imagine Mark, his face puffy with resentment, signing the back of that check. I imagine Sarah, her hand shaking with fury, doing the same. The act of cashing it was meant to be one final, pathetic gesture of defiance and insult. Your dollar's worthless to us. But I saw it differently. They were so defined by taking, so pathologically bent on getting what they felt they were owed, that they couldn't even refuse the last dollar, the symbolic dollar, the dollar that represented their entire share of a lifetime of disrespect. They had to have it. It was the final entry in Robert's ledger. Paid in full. I clicked the button to close the account, and I let them go. This evening, I sat at the desk with the first batch of grant applications. I'd asked Evelyn to send me just a few to start, to see what they felt like. The top one was from a man in Ohio, 42 years old. He worked full-time at a hardware store, then came home to care for his mother with advanced MS. He was trying to get a certification in medical billing at night, taking one class a semester at a local community college. He was 3 classes away from finishing. His application was short, factual, no embellished stories of suffering. Just the numbers, his income, his mother's medical expenses, the cost of tuition. At the bottom, in a section that asked for a personal statement, he had written only one sentence. My mother is a good person. She deserves to be comfortable. I just need a little help to get over the finish line so I can get a better job to make sure she is. I thought of Robert, his short nods, his quiet observation, his belief that character was revealed not in grand speeches, but in the small, consistent, thankless actions of daily life. He wasn't a man of charity. He was a man of accountability. He believed in paying what was owed. I picked up the heavy black fountain pen from the cup on the desk, Robert's pen. It felt balanced in my hand, solid. I uncapped it and made a note in the margin of the application, right next to the man's single, powerful sentence. Pay full remaining tuition. Add $5,000 for books and living expenses, effective immediately. I leaned back in the chair. The house was silent. It was a good silence, a peaceful silence. It was the sound of a debt being paid, not mine, but one I was now responsible for. It was never about the inheritance. It was about the inheritance of a purpose. I looked at Robert's empty chair, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a footnote. I felt like the author of the next chapter. The silence is the first thing I notice. It's been a week since the checks were cashed. A week since the last pleading text message from my mother went unanswered. A week since I stepped out of the lawyer's office and into the rest of my life. The silence isn't empty. It isn't the heavy, anxious quiet that filled Robert's house, thick with things unsaid. This is a different kind. It's the silence of a blank page, the quiet hum of a new beginning. It's mine. My new office is on the 3rd floor of a modest brick building downtown. It's not grand. It doesn't have the dark wood and leather smell of Robert's study. The walls are a soft, neutral gray. There's a simple desk, a comfortable chair, and a large window that looks out over the bustling street. On the frosted glass of the door, in clean black letters, are the words, "The Footnote Foundation." Seeing it still sends a faint, surreal hum through my bones. I was the footnote. Now I own the book. The first round of applications sits on my desk. They arrived in a simple cardboard box yesterday morning. I let it sit, unopened, for a full day. I was afraid to touch it, afraid that it would finally make this real in a way the money in the bank account never could. The money was an abstract number on a screen. This was different. This was purpose. This morning I made coffee, sat down, and cut the tape. There are 53 envelopes, all plain white. Some are crisp and businesslike. Others are soft, worn, clearly folded and refolded many times. I lay them out in neat rows, a grid of quiet lives. I pick one at random. The paper is thin, cheap. The story inside is not. It's from a man in his late 40s, a son caring for a parent with dementia. He'd been a contractor, but his mother's decline meant he had to be home. He couldn't leave her alone. His business dissolved. His savings followed. He wasn't asking for a fortune, just enough to hire a part-time caregiver so he could start taking small jobs again. Not a handout, a hand up. His letter is 2 pages long, written in a steady, uncomplaining hand. There is no self-pity, just facts. A balance sheet of a life derailed by love and duty. I put it aside and pick up another. A woman who worked 2 jobs to put her younger sister through community college after their parents died. The sister just graduated. The woman's car, the one she needs to get to both jobs, finally gave out. She's been taking 3 buses, turning a 40-minute commute into 2 hours. Each way, she just needs enough to fix her transmission. Another, and another. A high school janitor who uses his own meager salary to buy supplies for the art class because the school budget was cut. A single mother who needs a new laptop to finish her online degree, her old one finally crashing after 7 years. A librarian trying to fund a literacy program for adults in a forgotten rural town. These are the people Robert saw. The ones who show up, the ones who do the work, the ones who balance the ledger even when it costs them everything. They don't scream for attention. They don't demand their share. They just quietly do what needs to be done. They are footnotes in someone else's story. My throat feels tight. I get up and walk to the window, watching the anonymous faces on the street below. How many of them have a story like the ones on my desk? How many of them were like me, living in the margins, convinced their quiet efforts were invisible? Robert's inheritance wasn't a gift, it was a responsibility. It was an assignment. You see them, he was saying, because you were one of them. I go back to my desk. My phone buzzes. It's my mother. I let it go to voicemail. I know what she'll say. Mark is a wreck. Sarah won't speak to her. Can't we all just sit down, talk it through, find a way to forgive? She still doesn't get it. Forgiveness is for mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. It was a correction. A final, decisive entry in a ledger that had been unbalanced for decades. I think of Mark and Sarah. I wonder what they did with their dollar. Did they rip it up in a fit of rage? Frame it as a monument to their own victimhood? I don't know. And for the first time, I realize I don't care. Their story's over. Mine is just beginning. My gaze lands on a small frame photo on the corner of my desk. It's the only personal item I've brought into the office so far. It's an old picture of Robert, taken at a company picnic years ago. He's standing alone, holding a paper plate, looking off to the side. He isn't smiling. He never smiled for photos. It was one of the things Sarah always complained about. Lighten up, Dad, it's a picture, not a deposition. But I see it now, in the set of his jaw, in the clear, steady focus of his eyes. It wasn't a lack of joy, it was a lack of performance. He was a man who didn't deal in false fronts. He dealt in facts and evidence. The binders were his evidence. These applications are mine. I sift through the pile until I find the one that feels right. The envelope is slightly crumpled. The handwriting inside is a cramped, careful script. It's from a Mr. Abernathy. He's 63. For the last 40 years, he has been the head custodian at Northwood High School. He's retiring next year. His entire career, he's dreamed of visiting the national parks out west. He and his wife saved for years, but her medical bills wiped them out before she passed. He's not asking for a luxury tour. He just wants enough for a used camper van, gas, and park fees, so he can see the mountains he's only ever seen in books. His application includes a letter of recommendation from the school principal. It describes him as the first to arrive, last to leave. It details how he mentored troubled kids, how he stayed late on his own time to help set up for plays and concerts, how he knew the name of every student, how for 40 years he was the quiet, sturdy foundation the whole school was built on. A footnote. I remember Robert sitting in his armchair, reading the paper. He would make small notes in the margins with a silver pen, a question mark here, an underlined word there. He was always paying attention to the details, the things everyone else skimmed over. He would have liked Mr. Abernathy. I pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer. It's thick and cream-colored, with the foundation's name embossed at the top. I pick up a pen, the same kind Robert used, solid, heavy. My hand hovers over the page for a second, then it moves. I write a letter to Mr. Abernathy, informing him that his request has been approved in full. I tell him the foundation is honored to support a lifetime of quiet service. I tell him to send us a postcard from the mountains. Then I take the official approval form. In the space at the bottom, next to the line for the director's signature, is a single word. Approved. The word is small. The weight is immense. It's the opposite of a clerical error. It's a clerical correction. It's the balancing of a scale. I sign my name, Anna Riley. Not the stepdaughter, not the add-on, the director. I lean back in my chair, the pen still in my hand. Outside, the city hums with traffic and life. For so long, that noise was just a reminder of how small and silent my own life was. Now it sounds different. It sounds like possibility. Robert didn't just leave me his money. He left me his eyes, the ability to see the people in the margins, the footnotes, and he gave me the power to help them write their own next chapter. The inheritance wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of 100 more. and I was just getting started.